What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Cooper Stuff. We're going to do something kind of fun this week. I think we need a break from all the serious stuff, and this is going to be a super fun episode. I've got some new friends on here. I'm going to introduce them very quickly. First of all, we have Frank Turek, who I have just met recently, and then for the first time via Zoom, I'm meeting Frank's son, Zach Turek. So why don't we start, Frank, with you. You can give us a quick who you are. You're an author, apologist, radio show. You do a little bit of everything. Why don't you tell us who we are before we jump into what we're talking about?
Yeah, I'm the father of Zach and the husband of Stephanie. That's it right there. we have good. A ministry, as you know, John, the crossexamine.org, where we go to colleges, high schools, and churches and present the evidence that Christianity is true. I co-wrote a book almost 20 years ago now with Norman Geisler called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. So we go to colleges, we go to high schools, we go to churches, and we try and give people the reasons why Christianity is true. And we have a podcast called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, a TV show. We're on social media quite a bit. So that's what we try and do. And this new book that my son and I wrote has a lot of that in it. It has a lot of the evidence for Christianity in it, but it has it in a fun way. And Zach can tell you what the book's about.
Yep. So Zach Turek, military officer by trade, but obviously that's not what you're here to listen to me talk about. So I moonlight in apologetics, actually. I'm a graduate of Southern Evangelical Seminary from Charlotte, North Carolina. And this new book we have, Hollywood Heroes, is just kind of the first collaboration between my dad and I, trying to merge culture and Christianity in a way that is meaningful and positive and uplifting, and hopefully something that will resonate with some of our audience, because many of these movies I'm sure you have seen or heard about over the last 30 years. And hopefully we can unpack this in a new and exciting way.
Yeah, that sounds great. So people get an idea. We're going to be talking about this book. We're going to be talking about superheroes. Cooper Stuff fans already know that I love superheroes. In fact, I brought this in just for our meeting today. Check this out, guys. Look at that right there.
That is very cool. Spider-Man.
Check it out. You can see it at 1977.
Get out of here.
Oh yeah, man. This is the first, probably maybe the first toy I ever had in my life. And so I'm a huge Spider-Man fan, so I'm going to put it right here so he can enjoy our conversation.
That's vintage, man. You could sell that thing on eBay.
I know.
Yeah, you're getting street cred with the superhero nerds right now. Yeah, dude. That's an original right there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's OG. So this is going to be really fun talking about this book. But before we do that, I just do want to let Cooper Stuff fans know, because I always give people recommendations. If you're a parent, some grandparents watch Cooper Stuff now, but if you're a teenager, you're looking for answers to questions for things like, how do I know the Bible is real? How do I know God is real? If you want reasonable arguments to, whatever that may be, creationism versus Darwinism, yada, yada, crossexamine.org that Frank just mentioned is a fantastic resource. Your show is great. And I wish I had discovered you 20 years ago so I could have been telling everybody. So if anybody's looking for resources for that, go to crossexamine.org, which is how I got hooked up with Frank. So anyway, now we're jumping into it. I want to share the cover of the book. Here we go. Check it out. I love this, huh? So it's called Hollywood Heroes. And basically what you guys have done is you mentioned the movies in the beginning, which are like a lot of the movies that I love, a lot of Marvel films, Harry Potter, stuff like that. And you talk about the movies, and I've been told that Zach is actually the movie nerd of the two. Is that right?
Absolutely. Totally. Absolutely.
Yeah, he knows them front and back. So hit him with anything, man.
I think the academic word is cinemaphile.
That sounds better than a comic nerd. Okay.
That's right. That's right.
That's a distinction without a difference, but it sounds a lot better. All right. So why don't we start with you, Zach? Why in the world did you guys want to make a book about Hollywood heroes and how it relates to worldview and so forth?
Yeah, so I'll start with a story. As I mentioned earlier, I'm in the military, so obviously I spent some time in the Middle East. And one of the things, this is probably back to 2014 now, that really struck me about my experience is I went to a movie theater one time to see the original Guardians of the Galaxy. And I'm sitting in this movie theater in a Middle Eastern country with people from, I'm looking left, looking right, and I'm seeing people from all sorts of cultural and ethnic backgrounds and religious backgrounds too, all watching the same thing, eyes up towards the screen, basically with their jaws on the floor, enjoying what was happening. And so as I grew up in the world of apologetics, and we're always thinking about tools for evangelism, this is it really kind of struck me that this is a way that we could, as Christians, connect with people that we might not otherwise be able to engage with. And I think, as you've seen with Skillet, that they're just via music or any number of different ways, right? The more that we can do that as Christians, the better. And so thinking about how I enjoyed these movies personally, it kind of got me thinking about being able to write a book about it, or to be able to use that in some positive way. And lo and behold, a couple of years later, Dad and I are, spitballing ideas for a book. And this is really something that's solidified with us in a positive way for us to be able to tell the truths of Christianity through a way that was meaningful to our audience. Because once you actually unpack it, Christian themes are pretty rife, particularly in the superhero genre, right? I mean, the idea that we want someone to come and save us is something that comes very naturally to us. And in my opinion, it's one of the reasons why the genre does so well at the box office, because that really resonates with people. And so obviously we'll take that and turn that towards the real hero in Jesus. But that idea behind it is something that's really powerful, that keeps us coming back for more at the box office. The idea that someone is going to come and save us through no real, even though we haven't really done anything to deserve it. And that's really something that comes back and back in these movies.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talking about being overseas in service, the opening of the book begins with the story of a Navy SEAL who gave his life for his buddies. Was that right?
Yes, Michael Mansour in September of 2006 actually jumped on a grenade. Literally, you hear this as the ultimate heroic act. Well, he literally did it, and the reason he did it was because two of his SEAL buddies were lying at his feet. And when the grenade hit him in the chest and fell to his feet, he had no other opportunity to save them other than to smother it himself. So he did, and he died, of course, 30 minutes later. A couple of years later, President George W. Bush gave his parents his Medal of Honor, obviously posthumously, and actually the Navy named a ship after him, the USS Michael Mansour. It's a guided missile destroyer right now. So he gave his own life to save his two friends. He knew he was going to die as soon as he did it, but he did it anyway. And everybody, regardless of what religious worldview you believe in, even if you're an atheist, you look at that and you go, that's a supreme form of love. Well, that's what Jesus said. The greatest love is someone who lays down his life for his friends. And that's what Jesus did. But Jesus actually went beyond that. He didn't just lay down his life for his friends. He laid down his life for his enemies. And so we start out with Michael Mansour, and then we go through so many of the superhero genres and even the fantasy genres. As you know, John, we cover Captain America, Iron Man, Harry Potter. I know some Christians are going to be concerned with that. We can talk about that if you want. Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, Batman, Wonder Woman, Spider-Man's in there too, as is Superman. They're kind of embedded in these other chapters. And then they all point to the ultimate hero, Jesus of Nazareth. That's where this is all leading. All of these superheroes and fantasy characters who are heroes are pointing to the ultimate hero, Jesus.
Yeah, absolutely. It's awesome way you said it, that Jesus didn't just give his life for his friends. He gave his life for his enemies. It's such a radical.
Oh, yeah.
Such a radical gospel. I love it. I really loved the introduction. I just wasn't expecting it. I was expecting to open the intro and, and it be kind of like, talk about your love for comics. So, and it was straight into this story of this Navy SEAL. It was absolutely captivating, and it set up, what's my favorite part of the book, but I'm going to save that for saying, because I want to ask you an annoying question, and I'm only asking it because people ask me all the time, and I'm like, here we go. They're going to ask the question. Now I get to ask somebody else. What's it like writing a book with one of your family members? Because people always say, what's it like being in a band with your wife? I could never work. What's it like? And I'm like, I don't know. And they're like, yeah, but is it hard? Like, yeah, it's really hard. Nobody gets along with their spouse every day.
Right.
What's it like writing with your son or with your dad? That's got to be kind of weird.
Yeah, well, actually, Zach already has his degree from SES, like I had. Well, he was in the Air Force. He was going to SES Online, Southern Evangelical Seminary. That's where I was educated. So he knew his stuff already. So it really wasn't hard to write the book because Zach knew the movies and books inside and out. So I would just say, hey, Zach, why don't you do the first draft of the chapter because you know them inside and out, and then I'll throw my 2 cents in as I edit. So that's really how it happened.
So you don't have to argue about worldview and stuff.
No.
I don't like that. I don't think that's what Jesus would have meant by that, or you'd have to argue about.
Yeah, but you see, with you, it's harder with you, John, because if you hit a bad note on stage, you can't correct it.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
But he and I can. We if we make a mistake, we can still edit it before it goes out, right? You can't do that.
Yeah, but since Corey's not here right now, let's be honest. I never hit a bad note.
Oh, that's right. Okay,
absolutely.
That's all Corey. It's 100% her fault. Oh, that's cool. And Zach, what about for you? Was it kind of strange sending yourself to your dad? Like he's almost like a professor. So what happens if you're like, oh, I didn't quite say that right, and dad's gonna say, no, actually, son, that's heresy. It's gonna change this word or this word.
No, it really was a privilege. We had wanted to work together for a long time. My schedule has kind of been hectic over the last couple of years. It's hard to have your feet dipped in both worlds well. And so we've been able to take advantage of the opportunity that kind of COVID gave us for a little bit, to kind of take a step back and spend some time really sitting down and writing this. And it's an idea that we had been cooking up for really a number of years at this point. And so, as Dad mentioned, the book almost kind of writes itself when you think about it. I mean, this is some of these things that we're talking about here are just so rife with themes, with connections to Christian doctrine and even biblical characters in some cases. And it's just such an easy thing to do when you actually sit down and think about it, to come up with these connections. We've done a couple sessions with some readers, and they're coming up with things off the fly of things we didn't even think about, or characters that we hadn't even considered. Right. And so, this is just such a fruitful topic, I think, for us to examine. It really was a privilege to be able to write about that.
It was. The interesting thing too, John, is that out of all the movies that we covered in Hollywood Heroes, the subtitle is, by the way, How Your Favorite Movies Reveal God. There's only 2 movies or movie franchises in there that were written by Christians. One, of course, is Lord of the Rings, Tolkien. And the other, I know this is going to shock a lot of Christians out there, but the other is Harry Potter, written by J.K. Rowling. All the other movies, as to our knowledge, they were not written by Christians. But get this, even the movies not written by Christians can't help but put Christian themes in, not because they're putting them in deliberately, but because they understand that the reality of life is we all want to be saved from pain, suffering, and taken to a place of bliss. And good versus evil is everywhere. They can't tell a good story without in some way copying the greatest story ever told.
Yeah, I think that's powerful. I noticed that in the Spider-Man chapter or what have you, talking about how in the films, Peter Parker at first wants revenge, and then because of what he ends up doing, it ends up causing his Uncle Ben's death. And then he realizes, I need to use this power for the good of other people. And you're right. You really can't make up a better story than the stories of the Bible. You can't make up something, and that has to point to something inside of us that is eternal. The Bible says that God has put the eternity in the hearts of men, and you kind of allude to that. And getting to that was my favorite thing about the book. I was not expecting it to be so jam-packed. Well, let me rewind. I was expecting it to have worldview and themes from the Bible. I expected that, but it is jam-packed with worldview, like this is what the Bible is about. This is why Jesus came. And it's so throughout the book. I was a little stunned by it. I thought this is an excellent read for an adult. In other words, it's not just for teenagers. This is something adults could read and understand, I think, proper worldview. I'm assuming that was your goal in it,
Absolutely. That's what we're trying to do. Yep.
Yeah. And the other thing, just going back to your Spider-Man figure, this is no longer just a teenager thing. Most of us grew up with characters like this. I mean, how many of you have seen a Batman movie? Well, there's been Batman movies that have been released over the last 30 years now, dating back to the Michael Keaton ones. And so we can't just treat this like a kid's issue anymore. Now, obviously, some of it is directed towards kids and teenagers and parents of kids and teenagers. But, I'm going to be 35 this year. And guess what? I saw the new Doctor Strange movie when it came out. And so this is a much wider audience than I think some give it credit for.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this episode is coming out right on I'm glad we're doing a fun episode, but this has been a pretty tough couple of weeks. We have back-to-back mass shootings,
right.
And I'm not going to delve into that except to say everybody knows it's horrible, it's tragic, it's angering, it's saddening, it's everything. It's all the emotions all wrapped up in one. I can't think of a better time for a book like this. So I guess I would say it kind of sounds like a silly question, but what do you hope that people get? What do you hope that people get out of the book?
To me, it's a positive conversation, especially kind of growing up in the culture wars of the 90s. It's easy for us as Christians particularly Christian parents, to want to say no. And focus on negative things that happen in these movies. And there's a few that, to be honest, although I would argue that this genre of movies in particular is much lighter on some of the more political themes we've seen coming out of Hollywood recently. But we also, I was 30 before I thought about the positive examples from Star Wars, right? We talk about the religion of the Force and stuff like that. But when you talk about positive themes like sacrifice or, coming up with positive examples of heroic figures, how heroes can be weak, how heroes can value truth. And truth is actually one of the most important facets of love, right? When we say love wins, that actually means something and has some meat behind it, unlike what we get out of the culture, right? Love is not, hey, just do whatever you want. And we see in some of these movies that actually some of these characters are embodying that quality, saying that, no, you actually need the truth in order to love someone. I mean, these type of positive conversations are really what we're trying to engender with this book, particularly because, in our culture today, like you pointed out, it's easy to come up with examples of what's wrong in the
world. Yeah. In fact, the subject of evil, as you know, comes up in the Batman chapter. Mm-hmm. In fact, the issue of evil is throughout the book, the Hollywood Heroes book, but we spend a fair amount of time on it in the Batman chapter because the Batman movies, I think more than any other of the movies that we cover in Hollywood Heroes, they depict the depravity of man. Those movies do better than any other franchise out there.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. I think you might be right about that. And plus Batman's just awesome. So it's good. So I'm glad he's included. This may sound really weird, but sometimes when you meet Christian young people, I mean Christians who love God, they want to serve God, and they understand the Bible, which is awesome, but they don't always understand how to share Jesus with their friends. It's almost like it's an intellectual thing and it's real to them, but they don't know how to put it into real life. Do you think that this book could help young Christian people almost learn how to evangelize better, almost like a synthesis of, this is how you see Christ in the real world in movies or whatever, and you can apply that to other areas of your life?
100%. And that's one of the reasons why we wrote it. Because really what we're trying to do is what Paul does in Acts 17. Right, when he is talking to the Greeks, and now all of a sudden he's bringing up Greek philosophy and he's bringing up Zeus, right? And really, what he's showing at that point is that he's seen the quote unquote movies of his day, and he's interacting with his audience as culture. And when we think of movies as culture, this is one of the ways where you can cut across party lines, you can cut across ethnicity, you can cut across religion, and you have some common ground with someone and say, hey, I know that you kind of think this Jesus guy is a little weird, but let me show you something contextually that you have seen and you do understand. And I'm not going to say that it's a one-to-one comparison, but it's something like this. And now all of a sudden they have a mental image in their head of when Iron Man snaps his fingers, spoiler alert, at the end of Avengers Endgame to save the world or save the universe. Well, someone has actually done that. His name's Jesus, right? And now all of a sudden you have a segue into that conversation.
In fact, at the end of Endgame, Zach just brought it up there, John. It's amazing the character development that Tony Stark goes from being a selfish billionaire playboy at the beginning of the first Iron Man movie to a guy now who's going to sacrifice himself to save the world by the time you get to Endgame. And I don't know about you, I've heard people actually reading from Hollywood Heroes, or when they saw the book, when they saw the movie, I mean, when they get to that point where Tony Stark sacrifices himself to save the world from Thanos, this evil character who wants to kill half the population, they actually teared up because Tony Stark was their favorite superhero. Now, I don't think the authors of the Iron Man series were Christians, but they couldn't help put that kind of scene in because they knew it would resonate with audiences. I mean, imagine at the end of Endgame, if Tony Stark is about to take on Thanos and he says to his Avenger buddies, he goes, "Hey guys, I just don't feel like taking on Thanos today. In fact, I got to get back to following my heart and taking care of just me. I'm out." Would anybody go, "Man, what a great film. That was inspiring"? No, we'd all go, "That guy was a sissy. What a wimp, man. He backed down. He was selfish. He didn't sacrifice himself. That's awful." So here you got people who aren't Christians knowing that the truth of the matter is that something like a sacrifice to save the world is beautiful. Well, it really happened in real life. So why don't we point people that way?
Yeah, that's such a great point, man. Man, Endgame, I'm a huge fan. Now I'm all pumped up. Now I got to go back and watch Endgame because you just got me. You got me all excited. You just said something I think really profound, Zach, and that I think a lot of people don't think about, and that is that you're talking about Paul. How did you put it? He was the movies of his day when he was quoting poetry to Zeus or whatever it may be. Something really interesting about this. A lot of times we think of movies, music, we call it the entertainment industry. I play music. I'm in the entertainment industry, but art entertains, but art also is a way to either to speak about the culture, to describe the culture, or it's usually a way to move the culture, isn't it? So it's almost like even if we don't know it when we're watching these films are actually changing our mind about things. People have always known this, and you see it in sociology, right? When they go back and they say, "What was Rome like?" And they say, "Well, this was their government, this was their art, this was their whatever." And art is one of those pillars of civilization. So it's an interesting way to say the power of a book like this, where you're describing not just entertainment, you're describing art, which usually shifts the way that we think. I think that we Christians, we don't think about art all the time in that way. It's almost like we separate it. But it's kind of interesting because God can use art through us, all of us, through the books we write, the music we make, the podcasts we make, whatever. God can use this in order to shift the culture through Christian worldview. I mean, I know I don't need to tell you guys that, but it's kind of cool.
It is very cool. And the other thing, and you kind of touched on this earlier, John, is what all of that boils down to is, we're looking for an escape. And all of us, get that escape in different ways. Some of it is through art, some of it is through music, some of it is through sports, some of it is through literature. But what we keep going back to is this idea that you mentioned, we were created for eternity, or C.S. Lewis would say, if we come to the realization that we have this desire for another world, and the most likely explanation is that we were made for it. A different world, not this one. And that escape from this world, this reality, is what we keep looking for. And we can never find it until we finally come to the realization that the only way to get it is through Christ.
By the way, John, there's a great picture, speaking of Tony Stark, that I think it's a great visual picture of what I think is the second most important Bible verse in the Bible for today's culture. The first most important, obviously, is the gospel. But after that, I think Proverbs 4:23, guard your heart because everything you do flows from it. is the most important verse for today's culture, because today's culture is all about what? Follow your heart, follow your heart. Don't let anyone get in your way. You know, you got to swim every stream. You got to sail every ocean. You got to climb every mountain. That's like in some Disney movie somewhere. Anyway, right? You got to do all that in order to become someone. But the Bible says, don't follow your heart. It says, guard your heart. Well, look at Tony Stark. He's got everything that a man could want. Right? He's got money. He's got power. He's got a great girlfriend. He's got the big three: sex, money, and power. And he's still miserable, right? He has everything to live with and nothing to live for. And then a disaster occurs in his life when one of his own weapons detonates, because his company sold it to terrorists, and it detonates near him and puts shrapnel in his chest. Then he has to have a device put in the middle of his chest in order to prevent the encroaching shrapnel from piercing his heart. He has to have something to guard his heart. And if that thing fails, he dies. Well, what a beautiful picture of Proverbs 4:23. Above all else, guard your heart, because everything you do flows from it. It's only after he guards his heart and he stops following his heart that he realizes there are things more important in life than just what his own base desires are. It's only then does he become a hero and he sacrifices himself to save the world. So you could point this out to your kids. You could ask your kids, hey, kids, why isn't Tony Stark happy? He's got everything we think we want and he's still miserable. Why? Because he's not guarding his heart. He's following his heart. That's why he's miserable.
I love that, Frank. I'm going to use that too. I'm going to tell people that I made it up.
You can have it. Take credit.
I'm just going to steal it. Well, you just said something which actually was on my mind. I wanted to ask, but I just want to mention that, when you wrote that in the book, Proverbs 4:21.
Yeah, 4:23. Yeah.
When you wrote in the book, you mentioned that, of course, Proverbs is written from Solomon, who also wrote the book of Ecclesiastes, right, which is one of my favorites. And you just touched on what in the book you wrote it, what the entire book of Ecclesiastes is about. Solomon had it all. Would you call it the big three? He had all.
Yeah, sex, money, power. Had it
all of it. And he ends up absolutely miserable. And so you just touched on something that I was actually going to suggest. I always give recommendations to people watching Cooper stuff. There's a lot of families. I met a lot of dads that watch Cooper stuff with their kids on our last tour. And I hope you're watching right now. I want to give people a recommendation. This is an awesome book to read with your kids and then answer those questions. You have an explanation of what Tony Stark had with that shrapnel, and it's directly correlated to the Bible. It's such a great conversation starter. So I was going to ask you, actually, either one of you guys, have you met parents who have told you, hey, I read this with my kids and this and this and this? Have you had those conversations with any?
Well, the book's only been out like 3 weeks, but we see the reviews on Amazon, and there are several parents that have said, this is great. We didn't know there were all these connections in these movies. And now we read the chapter, then watch the movies. And at the end of every chapter in Hollywood Heroes, there's a series, there's 5 questions that they can use with their kids or use with a small group to help facilitate a discussion. So this is how they can get their kids more interested in God and Christianity, by having movie night. That's a lot better, a lot more fun for many kids than, mom and dad are about to give us another one of those lectures. Right? Why don't we have movie night instead? Mm-hmm. Right? And then the lecture will come naturally. It's going to come right off the screen.
Yeah. Well, I mean, whenever I watched movies with my kids, ever since they were little, they always want to talk about it afterwards. Yeah. They're excited. And it was like, in fact, it's kind of funny you mentioned, we just watched last night. We had our extended family over. So my niece is about 8 and my nephew is about 5. And they all came over and we actually finished the final Harry Potter film last night.
Very cool.
And it was that natural, after it's done, an hour of the kids, they want to talk about their favorite parts and the sad parts and the people that laid down their lives for others and stuff. What a great way. I don't know. So Zach, you can either say something about that or you can answer, what was the most difficult character for you to write? Was there any that was I don't know, harder, more challenging than the others, maybe?
I think for me, the most difficult one was Batman. Not because he was a hard character to write, but there are so many film adaptations of him that it's hard to pick one to focus on. And I think we saw that come naturally out as we were writing it. So my personal favorite trilogy for the Batman series is the Christopher Nolan trilogy.
Yes.
Whereas Dad gravitated more towards the more recent interpretation, Batman versus Superman, because there's a whole lot of heavy theological themes in there, if you'll remember, with kind of Lex Luthor talking about, Superman being God and the God versus man. And so melding those together in a way that was coherent was very challenging, I think.
The only thing superior about Batman versus Superman is getting to see Superman get his booty handed to him by Batman. That's the only thing. Anyway, go ahead, Frank. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I was just going to say that movie, Batman versus Superman. I know a lot of people didn't like it, but that movie actually addresses more deep theological questions than virtually any other movie we cover. In fact, the biggest is, if there's a good God, why is there evil? That movie directly addresses that issue. So we unpack that in Hollywood Heroes and say, here's how you can talk to your kids about this. It's interesting. Lex Luthor, not to reveal the whole thing, but Lex Luthor is mad at Superman because he thinks Superman is the God of this world, but he's mad at Superman, John, because Superman didn't stop Lex Luthor's own father from abusing Lex Luthor when he was a kid, right? So that's why he's mad. That's why he's pitting Batman against Superman. He wants Batman to take out Superman because Superman's a bad god, right? But notice what Lex Luthor's not mad about. He's not mad that God hasn't stopped him, Lex Luthor, from doing evil to other people. He just wants God to step in and stop people from doing evil to him, but he doesn't want God to stop him, Lex Luthor, from doing evil to other people. And isn't that true about all of us? That whenever we're upset about evil, rightfully so, we're never upset with our own evil. We're always upset with somebody else doing evil. We always say, hey, God, why don't you stop him? Or God, why don't you stop her? We never say, God, why don't you stop me? I always ask people, if God were to stop evil at midnight tonight, would you still be alive at 12:01? And the answer is none of us would be, right? So God gives us free will so we could love, but the problem is it opens up the problem for evil. It opens up the opportunity for evil. And we unpack this in the book Hollywood Heroes. And God can bring good from evil, even evil that we can't see any good coming from it, like these crazy mass shootings. And we can't fathom how any good could come from it. But we know that since God is outside of time, he can even bring good from things that, through the ripple effect, that we can't see. Anyway, that movie, Batman versus Superman, really gets into it. That's why I wanted to cover that in the chapter on Batman. And I think that chapter could be very helpful for people struggling with this question.
See, I think you may have changed my mind, Frank. That's deep stuff. That is super. You're right. That's absolutely deep stuff. There's also a cool metaphor. See, this is the kind of book that you could do sequels of, because you're never going to run out of material. So you can do a 2 and a 3. But there's also a cool correlation for the Batman Superman thing about the almost like the power state, because when you read old literature, whether you're talking about communism or even like the rise of Nazism and the power tyrannies, if you will, a lot of times they call them the Superman, in the old literature.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that's right. And so that's actually a cool thing too about, the Superman, about the godlike power of the state. I don't know, maybe I'm getting into something weird, but you could say that for a sequel, part 2 and part 3.
That's right.
We're taking notes right now, John. Yeah.
And just like you, we're taking your idea and not giving you credit for it.
Yeah, that's
right.
You can have the Iron Man. We'll take that one.
I think that would be really great. Anyway, okay, so we talked about that. This is a great thing for parents with kids, but also for youth ministry. And Frank, I know that you've been involved with youth ministry. You do apologetics for youth and for college, right?
That's right. Yeah.
You go into these things and you do debates. And I saw you debated even like did you debate Christopher Hitchens?
Yeah, we had a couple of debates back 2008, 2009. Of course, he died in 2011. But yeah, we had a couple of debates. They're all on our YouTube channel. People can see them there.
Mm-hmm.
And Hitchens was a brilliant British atheist who sounded more brilliant than he was because he had a British accent.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, he always had the upper hand with the accent. But yeah, we had a couple of good debates, and they can all be seen there. And we fold a lot of the apologetics, the evidence for the faith, right into Hollywood Heroes. So you're going to be reading about the movies, but you're also going to be reading about good theology and good evidence for the faith, and even biblical life lessons like the one about guard your heart. And there's several others. We get into Wonder Woman. We talk about how truth is important. Of course, Lord of the Rings has so many great lessons in there, as does Star Wars. Can we say a couple of things about Harry Potter? Because I know a lot of people are concerned about Harry Potter.
Go for it.
Zach, why don't you talk a little bit about Harry Potter and the comparison about the magic in Harry Potter to, say, the magic in some other movies that Christians seem to have no trouble with. They have trouble with the Harry Potter magic, but not, say, Lord of the Rings magic. Why is that?
Well, there's two things I think to highlight here. The first is that when we take certain things at face value, we often reject them outright. And I know, John, you probably experienced some of this through some of the bands you've toured with. And I think I was looking at your upcoming tour dates, and you're going to a concert called Hellfest in France somewhere, right? And there's a portion of our community where we're not careful, which will write you off just for going to that. And we want to, at a deeper level, maybe examine some of that. And so when we talk about things like magic or the occult, we need to be very, very careful as Christians to differentiate what we would say is descriptive and what is prescriptive, right? And so what I would say is that Harry Potter J.K. Rowling is never trying to get you to go do magic yourself, right? There is no pressure to go join something in the occult or to do anything like that. And the prohibition that we get in Scripture is very much, hey, you should not do this, right? And so as Christians, it's interesting that in some ways we are seemingly okay with magic in places like the Chronicles of Narnia, which is a magical world, or the Lord of the Rings, where Gandalf is literally a wizard, called the same thing that Harry Potter is. And so it's hard not to think that we're not doing ourselves a disservice by just writing it off without examining it, right? And to me, the test for whether or not I can do magic, or your kid can do magic if they read Harry Potter and want to do it themselves, is to tell them to go get on a broom and see if they can fly away. And obviously they can't, right? And so we've refuted that portion of what we're worried about simply by applying a simple test to it. And then the other thing to pile on there is to think about, it really in the form of the question, what if I told you that there was 7 books that you could have your kids read that don't mention the word sex, have an overwhelmingly positive worldview in terms of providing strong family relationships, friend relationships. The hero is an overwhelmingly positively, morally good character. It's this big fight against, between good and evil. And oh, by the way, he actually happens to be the best Christ figure probably in modern literature, if you look at how the parallels between Harry Potter and Jesus line up. And to me, again, we're not here to tell parents what they can and can't do with their kids, because obviously, that's really a decision for them to make. But to me, there's so much good to be had from reading or having your kids read or watch a series like this, that to me, the potential negatives, even though I don't think there are any, based off of what I just said, the positives way outweigh the negatives in that case.
Yeah, it's interesting, John. If you look at Harry Potter parallels Jesus in 4 distinct ways. He's prophesied to be the savior before he's born, and the Satan figure tries to kill him as an infant. That sounds familiar, right? Secondly, he has to live a moral life in order to be the savior of that world. Thirdly, he sacrifices himself in order to defeat this evil character, the Voldemort character, who's the Satan figure. And then finally, number 4, he rises from the dead, and his followers have to put their faith in him in order to complete the defeat of the Satan figure. Wow. Where did she get all that from? She got it right from the Bible. he's a Christ figure. In fact, she even says, J.K. Rowling says that Dumbledore is John the Baptist, the John the Baptist of Harry, who's the Christ figure. But Rowling said, I never wanted to talk about the biblical connection to our books and our movies because I didn't want readers to know where we were going. She didn't want to tip people off, but she said the whole series can be epitomized by 2 Bible verses. One is, and they appear in the books and the movies. One is the last enemy to be destroyed is death. That's 1 Corinthians 15. And the second is where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. That's from Jesus's Sermon on the Mount. So this is a very biblical movie that has this kind of magic in it that isn't real magic. It's not the kind of stuff we can actually do. It's just fantasy stuff made out of J.K. Rowling's mind. And again, we seem to have a double standard as Christians. We'll say no to Harry Potter, but yes to Lord of the Rings, yes to Chronicles of Narnia, and they have the same kind of magic in it. So I'm going, well, what's the deal here? Why do we have this double standard?
Yeah, I think that's, funny enough, I just kind of said it earlier and I forgot that probably even people watching Cooper stuff probably are like, maybe they wouldn't like me saying that I watched Harry Potter. I actually forget because in my mind, it's just like the Wizard of Oz or it's superpower. It's just like Spider-Man's superpowers would be magic, I guess. But right. I forget that of course, people do, but it kind of reminds me of that scripture, where it says to the pure, all things are pure, it doesn't give you license to do anything you want to in the world, but there's this idea of, hey, you take things for what it actually is. It's make believe. And I think that's, while I had no idea that J.K. Rowling had said those things or that I didn't know anything about J.K. Rowling. So I'm actually surprised to hear that, but I think that's a great explanation. This kind of leads me to my last question. Unless you guys want to talk about anything else, and you're welcome to. But last question would be this. We spend a lot of time on Cooper stuff, trying to train parents, trying to train young people up in Christianity worldview. How does Jesus want me to live? And young people are growing up in this insane world, as we've already mentioned. It's just so absolutely crazy. And every week it gets nuttier than the last week. Mm-hmm. And I always say, I'm so thankful I'm not a kid growing up right now. My gosh, I don't know what I would do if I was a teenager. But the question is this, being that you guys do so much with young people, is there anything that parents or youth leaders or older people at church, are there things that we can learn from younger people? What is it that we don't just look down at young people and say, they're all doing it wrong, and in my day, we knew this? Is there something we can look at them and say, actually, that's pretty good. I should take note of that.
Zach, what do you think?
I think the first is to make sure that we are not the sin police. Meaning that, as Lewis famously said, right, what we consider to be immodest is not necessarily sinful. Cultural norms shift, right? And so one of the things we keep trying to harp back on is, this conversation that I had growing up in the 90s about picking out, spot the lie, right? That's the game that I've heard played a lot. And that's always something that we need to do as parents. The one thing we can't forget to do is your kids are going to enjoy these movies for a reason. And it's not always because of all the bad stuff in it. And that's the number one mistake. I think that it's easy to fall into that trap is, oh, my kid only wants to see this because it says this swear word or has something bad in it. And oftentimes, particularly for movies like this, we want to see things because that ending, like we talked about, is really the thing that latches on for us as Christians. And so we want to make sure that we're not missing that, in addition to making sure that, we're keeping our hearts pure.
I think one thing that this culture is teaching us, John, is the importance of identity. A lot of people are struggling with identity right now. That's a real need. And secondly, that some people, and I don't know, this isn't a lesson they're trying to teach us deliberately, by observing the culture, I think we can detect it. Some people would rather be hated than ignored. What do I mean by that is the fact that people are looking for attention and they think they're going to somehow have their problems solved if they can just get the attention they want. This, I think, is behind the trans movement, right? It's behind a lot of the LGBTQ stuff. People think, well, I'm not really feeling right now. I can't seem to get happiness. Maybe if I go down this road, it's going to give me the happiness I want, because everybody's going to applaud me. They're going to give me the attention I want, and that's going to solve my innermost problems. Now, the truth of the matter is, those of us who are older know, we may have gone down roads like that ourselves. We realize, no, that's not the key to happiness. It's not getting all the attention. The key to happiness is to know God and to rest our hearts in him. We were made to run on him, not to run on the things that we see in this world. So we can learn a lot by looking at some of the real existential needs that this generation seems to be pursuing, and do what we can to point them in the right direction. Why do so many people, we look at these, I know these are extreme examples, but these mass shootings, why would anyone want to even do that? Why would they know they're going to die doing it? They would just rather have a name. They would rather have people cover them rather than ignore them. There's nothing worse than being ignored for some people. They have to have some notoriety. In fact, I was just doing some research. This goes before all of our times, but do you know, back in 1932, there was a famous kidnapping. There was a kidnapping of Charles Lindbergh's son. I won't tell you the whole story, but he was the most famous person in the world at the time. And his son was taken and went missing for more than 2 months. And there were more than 200 people that came forward to confess to be the kidnapper, and none of them were, even though the death penalty awaited them if they were convicted. These people were screaming out for attention, even the kind of attention that could get them murdered or killed via the death penalty. That's saying something about the human psyche. And we see that today, that people are just, they'll do anything for attention. So I think that's something we need to point out, that this is not the way forward, just attention for attention's sake.
I think that's really super deep. It reminds me of something I don't know if I've ever said in an interview before, but similar thing. A producer I was working with, he was making a record for me, and I'd written something, and he said, "John," he said, "you know what? It's fine. It's fine. It's middle of the road." And I said, you don't like it?" And he goes, "I just don't care, And he said, "That's not good." He said, "It would be better if I hated it, because I would have an emotion about it." He said, you never want somebody to turn on the radio and to feel indifferent about your song. You want them to love your song, or to hate it to the degree that they need to tell someone how much they hated it. You have to hear it. It's the worst thing I've ever heard. And then you actually generate, he's like, that's true passion. That's true art. If you do something that's in the middle, no one notices you, you're invisible. And that's the death, the death sentence for any artist. It's a little bit like what you just said. And it leads us to a great news for anybody watching that doesn't want to be invisible, that God knows your name. He knows your pain. He knows what you have been through. The Bible says that he calls us by name. That is an incredible thing. All the people that are living in this world, that God knows you. He knows what you are going through, and he wants to make your life whole. And I think, Frank, you started that answer talking about identity. He wants to, the Bible says that he wants to make us a new creation. That's a new identity.
Right.
That's pretty deep stuff.
Yeah. And Christianity is the only worldview where you don't achieve your identity, you receive your identity. Right. If you have to achieve if you have to achieve your identity, all the pressure's on you, man. There's always somebody that can do it better. Right. This is why people are screaming out for attention. They think they can achieve their identity. And the more people that laud them, the more people that applaud them, then they seem to get value from that. But in Christianity, you don't achieve a thing. God achieves it for you. You just receive it. That's why John says he's giving you the right to become a child of God. You're adopted right into the family. You're an heir to the throne. You don't do anything. You just accept it, right? You're in. Doesn't matter what other people think, good or bad, you're in, because God has already thought enough of you to send his only son to die for you. And that's the theme through many of these movies, John. That's what they are. They're all like, someone's coming to rescue you. Someone's coming to rescue you. You can't rescue yourself. Superman has to come in. Spider-Man has to come in. Wonder Woman has to come in. Iron Man has to do something, right? You can't do it yourself. Darth Vader's saved by his own son. No, there's a redeemer coming. That's what it's all about. That's what all these movies are about. That's why people love them. And all you can do is point them and say, these are myths. Here's the true myth. This really happened. Here's the evidence. It really happened.
Right back to Paul, Acts 17, right? What does he say? It's not like Zeus. When you say this about Zeus, I'm going to tell you that Christ does this for real. In him, we live and move and have our being. But that comparison, that's what we keep going right back to.
I love it. That is a awesome way to end this awesome podcast on such incredible news. They call it good news for a reason. That's good news about the God who loves us and rescued us. Thank you guys so much for joining. I should mention one last time where people can find your materials, Frank. Where do people go to find out everything about you and yada, yada?
It's crossexamined.org. That's crossexamined with a D on the end of it.org. And by the way, we have a podcast called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, once a week, 48 minutes. And we have a YouTube channel with well over 1,000 videos on there. Most of them are short Q&A videos from the college campus. So kids ask questions on a college campus about the truth of Christianity. And that's what those little videos are for. Also for the book, we have a little website which has a little video trailer on it. It's called HollywoodHeroesBook.com, HollywoodHeroesBook.com. Check it out there. And you can see the video trailer and see what the book's really all about, what we cover in there.
I love it. Yeah. Last encouragement for all the Cooper Stuff watchers. I keep giving people stuff to go watch because every time I meet somebody, they go, what can I use to learn about the Bible so I don't get caught up in all this stuff? So I want to say it again. Go check out those materials. Any question you're looking for, you're going to find on those YouTube channels. And it's just really great stuff. So can't thank you guys enough for coming on and having a great episode. I appreciate it.
Thanks for standing for the truth, John. We appreciate the work you're doing.
Thanks, Absolutely. Sean. Long time Skillet fan. Love what you're doing. Keep it up, man.
I love it, guys. Thanks so much. Have a great week, everybody.